My wife said she wanted to pause our marriage right before her 3-week research trip to Rome. She pictured me sitting at home in our quiet, perfectly decorated apartment, counting the minutes until she returned, probably sulking like a lost puppy. She assumed she could just press play when she got back and everything would go back to normal. But she was in for the shock of her life. Because while she was gone, she found out that I hadn't just been waiting around. I had pressed fast forward on a whole new life. One that didn't include her. What happens when a break becomes a breakthrough? This story is a wild ride, and you're not going to want to miss a single second. Before we dive into the details, do me a quick favor and hit that subscribe button for Ken's story, give this video a like, and drop a comment below letting us know what you would do in my shoes. It helps us out a ton. Alright. You ready? Let's start at the beginning. It all started on a Tuesday evening in our downtown Denver apartment. The air was still and quiet, the way it always was. Our home felt less like a living space and more like one of the art galleries my wife, Eva, spent her days in. Every piece of furniture was a designer statement. Every book on the coffee table was a carefully chosen art history volume. It was her masterpiece, and most days, I felt like I was just a guest who wasn't allowed to put his feet on the couch. I was working remotely as a software architect, which meant I spent most of my time in that pristine, silent space, careful not to disrupt the perfect order she had created. She brought it up while she was packing, folding a silk blouse with meticulous care. "Liam," she began, her voice calm and detached. "You know how critical this Rome trip is for my research. It's a major step for my career." I nodded, of course. I'd always been her biggest supporter. "And I've been thinking," she continued, not looking at me. "I need to do this alone. I think we should pause our marriage for these 3 weeks." The word pause just hung there in the air between us, feeling sharp and cold. It was a gut punch I didn't see coming. A pause? I finally managed to ask. "Eva, what does that even mean?" She finally turned to face me. Her expression wasn't sad or apologetic. It was almost clinical, like a doctor delivering a diagnosis. "It means I need space, Liam. I feel stifled. This predictable routine, this quiet domestic life. It's just not enough for me right now. I need to go to Rome and just be Dr. Evelyn Reed, the art historian. Not a wife. I need to focus on myself without any distractions." The unspoken word was that I was the distraction. Our life together was the routine she found so suffocating. Her tone made it absolutely clear this wasn't a negotiation. It was a declaration. She was framing it as some kind of enlightened, modern approach to relationships, but it felt like an ultimatum. Agree to be put on a shelf for 3 weeks, or risk being seen as the unsupportive husband holding back her brilliant career. So, like I always did, I pushed down my own hurt and confusion. I nodded slowly and said, "Okay, Eva, if that's what you think you need." I had no idea that her calculated pause would become my unexpected play button. The few days before Eva left for Rome were filled with a subtle kind of cruelty. It wasn't loud or aggressive, but it was in everything she said and did. It was as if, now that the pause had been declared, she no longer needed to pretend to value my thoughts or my comfort. My favorite leather armchair, worn imperfectly over the years, became a target of her disdain. "Liam, while I'm gone, do me a favor and don't even think about buying a replacement," she said, running a hand over its cracked surface with disgust. "When I get back, we're getting rid of this eyesore and putting in a proper chaise lounge." She wasn't asking. She was informing me of a future I apparently had no say in. Our final morning together was just as cold. The drive to the Denver International Airport was mostly silent. When we got to the drop-off curb, she gave me a quick, passionless peck on the cheek. "Don't forget to water the orchids," she said, her mind already halfway across the Atlantic. There was no "I'll miss you." No, "take care of yourself." It was a transaction. I was the house sitter, the caretaker of the life she was so eager to escape. I watched her walk away, pulling her sleek designer suitcase behind her, and I had never felt more alone. That feeling only intensified over the next few days. The first night, I took a picture of the stunning sunset over the Rocky Mountains from our balcony and sent it to her, with a simple message, "Thinking of you." I thought it might bridge the distance between us. I didn't get a reply until the next morning. It wasn't words. It was a photo of her, clinking champagne glasses with a group of sophisticated-looking academics at a rooftop bar in Rome. The Colosseum lit up behind them. Her caption simply read, "Finally feeling inspired." She hadn't even acknowledged my message. I tried a couple more times, sending texts asking how her research was going. The replies were brutally short. Busy. Productive. Exhausting. It became painfully clear that she wasn't just on a research trip. She was performing a new life, a better life, and I had no role in it. The pause wasn't about finding herself. It was about forgetting me. And as I sat there in that silent, gallery-like apartment, surrounded by furniture she chose and art she liked, I realized the truth. The coldness didn't start when she got on that plane. It had been there for years. I had just been too busy trying to keep her warm to notice I was freezing. After a full week of wallowing in that mausoleum of an apartment, my phone rang. It wasn't Eva. It was my old college buddy, Mike. His voice was like a blast of fresh air through a stale room. "Dude," he said, "I haven't heard from you in a week. You haven't fallen into one of Eva's minimalist vases, have you?" I gave a weak laugh, but he could hear the emptiness in my voice. "All right, that's it. I'm picking you up tomorrow. 6 a.m. sharp. We're hiking." I tried to get out of it, but Mike wasn't taking no for an answer. The next morning, bleary-eyed and running on leftover pizza and self-pity, I was in his rugged Jeep heading towards the mountains. The crisp, cold air of the Rockies was a shock to my system. As we started the steep ascent up the trail, my lungs burned, but for the first time in a week, I felt something other than a dull ache in my chest. We barely spoke for the first hour, the only sounds being our boots crunching on the gravel and our heavy breathing. Finally, we reached a scenic overlook. The view was breathtaking, a panoramic vista of snow-dusted peaks and deep green valleys under a brilliant blue sky. Mike handed me a water bottle. "Okay, Liam, talk to me. What's going on?" So I told him everything. The pause. The cold goodbye. The dismissive texts. I expected sympathy, maybe a "hang in there, buddy." But Mike just shook his head, a look of frustration on his face. "I'm only going to say this once, man, because you're my friend," he started, his voice serious. "When are you going to wake up? Eva has been treating you like a doormat for years. She doesn't respect your job, she hates your hobbies, and she slowly cut you off from all your friends. Me included." His words were blunt, and they stung. But deep down, I knew he was right. "She doesn't see you as a partner, Liam," he continued, his voice softening slightly. "She sees you as a supporting character in her story. This pause isn't a break for you. It's her auditioning for a life without you in it, while keeping you on standby just in case it doesn't work out. You need to stop waiting by the phone for her to press play. It's time to take the controller back for yourself." We stood there in silence for a few minutes, letting the wind whip around us. He was right. All this time, I had been looking at the pause as a problem to be endured. But Mike made me see it for what it truly was. An opportunity. An escape. As we headed back down the mountain, my legs felt sore, but my mind felt clearer and lighter than it had in years. The pity party was officially over. It was time to get to work. When I got back home from that hike with Mike, the apartment felt different. The silence that had felt so suffocating just that morning now felt like potential. The pristine, gallery-like space no longer seemed intimidating. It just seemed empty. Lifeless. For the first time, I saw it through my own eyes, not through Eva's. And I realized I hadn't contributed a single thing to this home that reflected who I was. Eva had meticulously curated every inch of it, and in doing so she had curated me right out of the picture. Driven by a new, unfamiliar energy, I walked past the living room and went straight to the one place in the apartment that was technically mine but had been completely colonized by her. The garage. Eva didn't park her car in there. It was far too utilitarian. Instead, it had become a sterile, climate-controlled storage unit for her art overflow. Canvases that didn't fit her current aesthetic, sculptures from previous exhibitions, and stacks of art books. It was another showroom, just with a concrete floor. Tucked away in the far corner, almost completely buried under a dust cover and behind a stack of packing crates, was my project. A vintage Schwinn bicycle I'd bought at a flea market a year ago. I remembered the day I brought it home, excited by the idea of restoring it. Eva had taken one look at it and called it a tetanus trap. She said it was an eyesore and made me hide it away, declaring the garage off-limits for any greasy hobbies. I pulled off the cover. It was dusty and flecked with rust, the tires were rotted, but the frame was solid. The bones were good. Looking at that forgotten bike, I saw a perfect metaphor for myself. Neglected, undervalued, and left in a dark corner to collect dust. But full of potential. Right then and there, a decision was made. This wasn't Eva's storage unit anymore. This was my workshop. I spent the rest of the afternoon moving her precious art overflow, carefully stacking it against one wall. I cleared a massive space in the center of the garage. I found my old toolbox, wiped the dust off, and laid the tools out. The echo of the metal clinking on the concrete was the most satisfying sound I'd heard all week. This wasn't just about fixing a bike anymore. This was about rebuilding a life. The next morning, I didn't wake up with that familiar sense of dread. Instead, I felt a spark of purpose. I made a simple cup of coffee in the kitchen, a kitchen where I suddenly noticed the espresso machine was more complicated than my first car, and headed straight for the garage. My garage. My workshop. My sanctuary. The first order of business was to strip the Schwinn down to its bare frame. As I began to disassemble it, loosening bolts that had been frozen in place for decades, I felt a strange sense of release. Every piece of rust I scrubbed away, every greasy part one cleaned, felt like I was shedding a layer of the old me. The passive, accommodating Liam who always put his own interests last. I quickly realized I was in over my head. I needed specialized tools to remove the crankset and a specific type of paint that would hold up. A quick online search pointed me to a place called the Denver Bike Co-op, a community workshop not far from my apartment. I'd driven past it 100 times on my way to fancy restaurants with Eva, never giving it a second thought. She would have called a place like that grimy. Walking into the co-op was like stepping into another universe. It wasn't sterile or silent. It was buzzing with life. Music was playing from a speaker, people were laughing, and the air was thick with the smell of rubber and degreaser. It was organized chaos. Bikes in various states of repair were hanging from hooks, and bins filled with every imaginable part lined the walls. A woman with grease smudges on her cheek and a friendly smile greeted me from behind a workbench. "Hey there," she said. "First time here? What's the project?" There was no judgment, no pretense. I showed her pictures of my Schwinn, and instead of calling it junk, her eyes lit up. "Oh, a classic," she said. "The bones on those are incredible." Within minutes, a couple of other members gathered around, offering advice on how to handle the rust and what kind of primer to use. They showed me how to use the tools I needed and invited me to come work on it there if I wanted. I spent 2 hours there, asking questions, learning, and just soaking in the atmosphere. I walked out with a can of paint, a set of new tools, and something I hadn't realized I was starving for, a sense of belonging. This was a world where people built things, they didn't just buy them. And for the first time in a long, long time, I felt like I was exactly where I was supposed to be. That first visit to the bike co-op was the catalyst. It lit a fire in me that I didn't know I had. My days quickly fell into a new, invigorating rhythm. I'd log into my software architect job at my designated start time, write code with a focus I hadn't felt in months, and the moment I logged off, I wasn't aimlessly wandering the silent apartment. I was heading straight to the garage with a sense of mission. The Schwinn became my singular focus. It was more than a hobby. It was a healthy obsession. My evenings were no longer spent watching whatever pretentious foreign film Eva had insisted we see. Instead, they were filled with the satisfying sounds of progress, the whir of a wire brush cleaning away old rust, the rhythmic sanding of the steel frame, the soft hiss of a spray can as I laid down the first coat of primer. I spent hours online, not scrolling through social media, but watching tutorials, reading forums, and hunting down authentic vintage parts from collectors across the country. My apartment, once a sterile gallery, now had bicycle parts soaking in degreaser in the utility sink. I even started sketching out custom design ideas, something I hadn't done since college. I felt my own creativity, long dormant, finally reawakening. The transformation was more than just mental. It was physical. I was eating better because I needed the energy. I was sleeping better because I was physically tired and mentally fulfilled. I started taking long bike rides on my modern road bike just to clear my head and feel the wind, exploring parts of Denver I'd never seen. The city was no longer just the backdrop for Eva's sophisticated life. It was becoming my city. One evening, while I was carefully painting a fresh coat of deep metallic blue onto the Schwinn's frame, my phone buzzed. It was a text from Eva. Another photo of her at some lavish event, smiling emptily. I glanced at the photo, then back at my work. My hands were stained with paint, my muscles ached from sanding, and I was happier than I had been in years. I put the phone down without replying and went right back to painting. Her world of champagne and superficial praise felt a million miles away, and for the first time, I had absolutely no desire to be there. I was building something real, something tangible, something that was entirely mine. After another week of meticulous work, the Schwinn was finally finished. It was magnificent. The frame gleamed with a deep midnight blue finish, accented by polished chrome fenders and a new, rich brown leather seat. It wasn't just a restored bike. It was a work of art, a testament to the hours I had poured into it. I felt an immense sense of pride, a feeling I hadn't experienced in a very long time. It was a tangible accomplishment, not just lines of code on a screen. The only thing left to do was to take it for its maiden voyage. I decided to ride it to a coffee shop I'd heard about from the folks at the co-op. It was called The Daily Grind, and it was known as a hub for the local cycling community. As I rode through the streets of Denver, the bike felt smooth and solid beneath me. I felt a sense of freedom I hadn't realized I was missing. When I arrived, I saw I wasn't the only one. A dozen different bikes were parked out front, from sleek carbon fiber racers to rugged mountain bikes. The inside of the Daily Grind was the complete opposite of my apartment. It was warm, vibrant, and filled with the rich aroma of roasted coffee and the low hum of conversation. Cycling jerseys hung on the walls like art, and a massive chalkboard listed the daily specials next to doodles of bicycles. And behind the counter was the heart of it all. Her name was Jenna. She had a bright, genuine smile and a warmth that seemed to radiate through the whole shop. She moved with an easy confidence, laughing with a regular as she worked the espresso machine. I ordered a black coffee and found a seat by the window. A few minutes later, Jenna brought my mug over. "I have to say," she began, her eyes sparkling with curiosity, "I was admiring your bike through the window. That's a gorgeous restoration. A '68 Schwinn Typhoon, right? You don't see many of those in this kind of shape." I was floored. Not only did she notice, but she knew exactly what it was. Eva would have walked right past it without a second glance unless it was featured in a museum catalog. "Wow, yeah. It is," I replied, a surprised smile spreading across my face. "Just finished it. It was my first project." "No way," she said, genuinely impressed. "You've got a real talent. It's beautiful." We talked for another 10 minutes about bikes, about the co-op, about coffee. The conversation was effortless, natural. There was no pretense, no agenda. She wasn't trying to impress me, and I wasn't trying to live up to some impossible standard. As I left the Daily Grind that afternoon, the great coffee wasn't the only thing that had put a warmth in my chest. It was the simple, powerful feeling of being seen. I became a regular at the Daily Grind after that. It started as an excuse to get out of the apartment, but soon it became the best part of my day. It was my new home base. I'd bring my laptop and do my software work from a corner table, soaking in the lively atmosphere. And every day, I'd spend a few minutes talking with Jenna. I learned that she had quit a soul-crushing corporate marketing job 2 years ago to open the cafe, pouring her life savings into her passion. She was brave, down-to-earth, and incredibly sharp. She represented everything I was starting to realize I wanted in my own life. We talked about everything, but we always came back to the bikes. She loved the stories behind the vintage frames, and I was fascinated by her vision for creating a community space, not just a business. One afternoon, as I was packing up to leave, she stopped me. "Hey, Liam," she said, a thoughtful look on her face. "I have a kind of crazy idea for you." She led me to the back storeroom. Underneath a pile of old burlap coffee sacks was a dusty, forgotten frame of a women's cruiser bike, elegant and stylish even under the grime. "This was my grandmother's," she explained. "It's been sitting back here since we opened. I've always wanted to do something with it, but I never had the time or the skill. After seeing what you did with that Schwinn, I was wondering if you'd be interested in a commission." I was taken aback. "A commission? You want to pay me to fix it up?" "Not just fix it up," she said, her eyes lighting up with an idea. "I want you to turn it into an art piece. A showstopper. Something we can hang in the front window to really grab people's attention. Keep the vintage feel but give it your own creative spin. I'll cover all the costs for parts, and pay you for your time, of course. You'd have total creative freedom." Creative freedom. The words echoed in my head. 4 years, my life had been about fitting into Eva's meticulously designed world. My opinions on everything from art to furniture were routinely dismissed. Now, here was this incredible woman, not just appreciating my passion, but trusting me with a piece of her own family history. She was offering me a project where my vision was the only one that mattered. It was more than just a job offer. It was a validation of this new path I was on. "I would be honored," I said, a wide, genuine smile spreading across my face. "I'd absolutely love to." Working on Jenna's grandmother's bike was a completely different experience. My first project, the Schwinn, was a solitary journey of self-discovery. This one was a partnership. Jenna insisted on being part of the process. After she'd close up the coffee shop for the day, she would come over to my garage, my workshop, with a couple of beers or fresh pastries, eager to see the progress. The space that once felt like my private sanctuary now felt comfortably shared. It was amazing how her presence could make a cold, concrete garage feel as warm and inviting as her coffee shop. Our work sessions were filled with easy conversation and laughter. We'd brainstorm ideas together, sketching out designs on scraps of paper. She'd tell me stories about her grandmother riding that very bike through the city decades ago, and I found myself opening up about my own life, my job, and the passions I had suppressed for so long. She was an incredible listener. When I talked about a design idea, she wouldn't just nod along. She'd ask thoughtful questions, building on my ideas with her own creative flair. We decided on a beautiful vintage seafoam green for the frame, with custom-painted cream accents and a handcrafted wooden crate for the front. One evening, we were working late, carefully polishing the chrome handlebars. Music was playing softly from my phone, and the smell of wax and metal polish filled the air. There was a moment when we both reached for the same polishing cloth, and our hands touched. It was a small, simple thing, but a jolt of electricity shot through me. We both pulled back for a second, a little surprised, before sharing a shy smile. In that moment, the unspoken thing that had been growing between us finally came to the surface. This wasn't just a business arrangement anymore. The feeling was so fundamentally different from my relationship with Eva. With Eva, every decision was a negotiation. Every opinion of mine was something to be scrutinized or corrected. Our life felt like a performance where I was constantly trying to remember my lines. With Jenna, there was no performance. It was just easy. It was two people genuinely enjoying each other's company, building something beautiful together, piece by piece. As the bike came together, so did we. And I started to realize I wasn't just building a custom bike. I was discovering what it felt like to have a true partner. The day we finished Jenna's grandmother's bike was bittersweet. We mounted it in the front window of the Daily Grind, and it was an absolute showstopper. The seafoam green frame caught the sunlight perfectly, and it immediately became a conversation piece for everyone who walked in. Seeing my work proudly displayed like that, seeing the joy it brought Jenna, it was a feeling of accomplishment that my six-figure software job could never give me. The bike was more than just a project. It was a symbol of my new life. And that life was growing faster than I could have imagined. Thanks to the display at the cafe, my little hobby started to look like a real business. Other cyclists, impressed with the craftsmanship, began approaching me for custom work. I had a waiting list. My garage was no longer a silent sanctuary but a bustling workshop. I started a simple website with a photo gallery of my work, calling it Mile High Restorations. My social circle had completely changed, too. My weekends were now filled with group rides, visits to the co-op, and hanging out with Jenna and the friends I'd made through her shop. We were a community, brought together by a shared passion. It was real, it was authentic, and it was mine. My relationship with Jenna had blossomed into something real and beautiful. We had our first official date, a simple picnic by a mountain lake, no fancy reservations or designer clothes required. With her, I felt seen, valued, and completely at ease. She loved the version of me that had grease under his fingernails and a creative vision, the version of me Eva had tried so hard to erase. Then, one night, just shy of the 3-week mark, my phone buzzed with a notification I had been dreading. It was a text from Eva. I'd almost forgotten what it felt like to see her name pop up on my screen. My heart sank. The message was short and casually possessive, as if nothing had changed. Flight lands tomorrow morning. Can't wait to see you and unpause. I miss you. Reading those words, unpause and I miss you, felt completely hollow. They were words from a different lifetime. 3 weeks ago, that message would have been a lifeline. Now, it felt like an eviction notice. My stomach twisted into a knot, not with excitement, but with a profound sense of dread. The star of the show was returning, and she was expecting her supporting character to be waiting in the wings, ready to play his part. But she had no idea the stage was now empty, and I was starring in a completely different production. I didn't sleep much that night. I spent hours cleaning the workshop, putting my tools away, feeling like I was hiding evidence of a crime. But what was my crime? Finally finding my own happiness? The thought was absurd, but the anxiety was real. The next morning, I drove to the airport on autopilot, my mind racing. What would I say? How would she react? A bigger question loomed. Who was the man who was about to pick up his wife? It certainly wasn't the same man who had dropped her off 3 weeks ago. When she walked through the sliding glass doors of the arrival terminal, she looked exactly the same, impeccably dressed in a stylish travel blazer, her hair perfect, her expression confident and controlled. She scanned the crowd, and for a moment, her eyes passed right over me before doing a double take. A flicker of confusion crossed her face. I had lost the puffiness of unhappiness. My skin had some color from being outdoors, and I was standing taller, straighter. I wasn't wearing the soft, unassuming sweater she liked, but a simple, well-fitting t-shirt that showed the new definition in my arms from hours of physical work. "Liam," she said, her voice a little uncertain as she approached. "Wow, you look different." It wasn't a compliment. It was an observation, tinged with suspicion. The drive home was awkward. She filled the silence with stories about her triumphs in Rome, the influential curators she'd met, the rare archives she'd accessed. It was all about her. She never once asked me a simple, "So, what did you do?" She just assumed my life had been on hold. The real shock came when she walked into our apartment. The air wasn't still and silent anymore. The faint, pleasant smell of wood polish and citrus degreaser hung in the air, having seeped in from the garage. She noticed it immediately, her nose wrinkling in distaste. Then she saw the living room. Her precious art books on the coffee table were slightly askew, and next to them sat a schematic I'd been sketching for a new bike frame. My worn leather armchair, the one she despised, was still there, looking more comfortable and defiant than ever. The apartment no longer felt like her pristine gallery. It felt like someone actually lived here. She dropped her bags with a thud, her perfectly curated composure finally cracking. She spun around to face me, her eyes wide with a mixture of disbelief and indignation. "What happened here, Liam?" she demanded, her voice sharp. "What on earth is that smell? And what have you been doing?" She was expecting to come home to her loyal subject in her perfectly preserved kingdom. Instead, she had returned to find a quiet rebellion had taken place, and the king she had left behind was no longer recognizable. Alas! I took a deep breath, steeling myself. The time for hiding was over. "I've been busy," I said, my voice steady and calm, a stark contrast to the agitated energy radiating from her. I finally started that project I told you about a long time ago. The vintage bike. Eva stared at me, her face a mask of disbelief. The rusty piece of junk in the garage. She scoffed, as if the very idea was beneath her. That's what that smell is. You've been playing with that thing. I've been doing more than just playing, Eva, I replied, leading her towards the garage. I felt a strange sense of confidence as I opened the door. She expected to see a mess of grease and junk. Instead, she saw a clean, organized, and functional workshop. My tools were hung neatly on a pegboard. Blueprints and sketches for new designs were pinned to a corkboard. In the center, under a bright worklight, was the frame of a new project, a beautiful 1950s Roadmaster I was restoring for a client. It was a space of purpose and passion. She stood at the doorway, refusing to step inside, her arms crossed tightly. Her eyes scanned the room, not with curiosity, but with a cold, critical gaze, like she was appraising a piece of art she found utterly tasteless. You've turned our garage into a repair shop, she said, her voice dripping with condescension. I started a small business, I explained calmly, refusing to be baited into an argument. It's called Mile High Restorations. I even have a website and a waiting list of clients. I was proud of what I'd built from nothing, and for a foolish second I thought maybe, just maybe, she might see the accomplishment in it. I was wrong. Her shock quickly curdled into anger. A website. Clients. Liam, what were you thinking? She snapped, her voice rising. This is a silly, dirty hobby. It's not who we are. I was in Rome, networking with some of the most important people in the art world for our future, and you're here, playing with scrap metal. This makes me happy, Eva, I said simply. That's what broke her composure completely. Happy? She almost shouted. This isn't about being happy. This is about our life. This was a pause, Liam, not a breakup. A pause is supposed to be for reflection, for missing each other, not for you to completely change into someone I don't even recognize and build some bicycle empire behind my back. The denial was thick in her voice. She couldn't comprehend that her perfectly controlled world had spun on without her. More than that, she couldn't accept that it had thrived. Alas. Once the initial shock wore off, Eva's denial hardened into a calculated strategy. If I wouldn't willingly revert to the man she'd left behind, she would simply force him back into existence. The campaign to win Liam back began, and it was as manipulative as it was transparent. She tried nostalgia first. One evening, she came into my workshop holding 2 glasses of expensive wine, the kind she used to buy for special occasions. Remember that trip we took to Napa? She said, her voice soft and saccharine. We were so happy then. Carefree. I was thinking we could go back, just the 2 of us. We can forget all about this messy business. She gestured vaguely at my workbench, as if my newfound passion was a temporary illness that a vacation could cure. When I politely declined, her smile tightened. Next, she went on the offensive, subtly at first, then with increasing venom. Her primary target was my new life, and by extension, Jenna. She accidentally found my business website. Mile High Restorations? It sounds a bit provincial, don't you think, Liam? She mused over dinner. And your main client is that little coffee shop? It's cute that you're helping a local girl out, but it's hardly a foundation for a serious future. Every word was a carefully crafted barb, designed to make my accomplishments feel small and foolish compared to her grand world of international art. Her most blatant move came a few days later. She knew I usually met Jenna at the daily grind after work. Eva showed up unannounced, dressed to the nines in a sharp designer dress that was completely out of place in the relaxed, comfortable atmosphere of the cafe. She introduced herself to Jenna with a smile that was all teeth, her eyes sweeping over Jenna's simple apron and comfortable shoes with unconcealed disdain. She proceeded to dominate the conversation, talking loudly about a recent gala at the Denver Art Museum and name-dropping artists and curators, creating an invisible wall of status and sophistication around herself. It was a power play, a pathetic attempt to mark her territory and paint Jenna as some simple coffee girl who was beneath me. But none of it worked. The nostalgia felt like a memory from someone else's life. Her criticisms of my business only strengthened my resolve. And watching her try to intimidate Jenna, who handled the entire situation with a calm, unimpressed grace, didn't make me doubt my choices. It solidified them. Eva wasn't fighting for me, the person I had become. She was fighting for a possession she thought was hers. She was trying to put a beautifully restored classic back into a dusty garage, and I was never going back in there again. Alas, after the disastrous and transparent performance at the Daily Grind, the tense atmosphere in our apartment became unbearable. The fragile peace was gone, replaced by a heavy, cold silence. Eva finally broke it a couple of nights later. I was in the living room, sketching a new design, and she stood in the doorway, her arms crossed, her face devoid of the fake smiles and forced nostalgia. All that was left was raw, unfiltered frustration. The campaign was over. It was time for the ultimatum. "I can't do this anymore, Liam," she said, her voice dangerously calm. "I came home, and my husband is gone, replaced by a stranger who smells like motor oil and would rather spend his time with bicyclists than with his own wife. I have given you a chance to come to your senses, to remember the life we built. The important life. But you're not listening." She took a step into the room. "So this is it. You have to choose. It's either this ridiculous fantasy, this greasy hobby and that little coffee shop girl, or me. Your wife. Your future. Our future. You need to dismantle that workshop, and we will never speak of this again. We'll go to Napa. We'll go back to being us." I put my sketchbook down and looked at her, really looked at her, and for the first time I felt no anger, no resentment. Only a profound, sad clarity. "There is no us to go back to, Eva," I said, my voice steady. "There was only ever you, and me orbiting around you. I was an accessory to the life you were building. A convenient, supportive, and quiet part of the background scenery." I stood up and walked towards her. "You think that 3 weeks ago we were happy, and I just went crazy while you were gone. But you're wrong. We weren't happy. I wasn't happy. I was just quiet. Your pause wasn't the problem, Eva. It was the cure. It was the first time in years that I had silence, real silence, not just the absence of your voice. And in that silence, I finally heard my own. A look of genuine shock finally appeared on her face. This was a Liam she had never seen. "This isn't a fantasy," I continued, gesturing around the room, which now felt more mine than hers. "This workshop, this business, these new friends. This is the most real thing in my life. And Jenna, she doesn't see me as an accessory. She sees me, the person I am now. And I'm not giving him up." I looked her straight in the eye, the finality of my words hanging between us. "So you're right. I have to choose. And I choose this. I choose the grease, the bikes, and the life I'm building for myself. I choose me." That final confrontation was the end. There was no more arguing, no more pleading. It was as if the final gear had clicked into place. Eva saw in my eyes that the quiet, accommodating man she had married was truly gone. She moved out a week later, hiring movers to silently pack up her designer furniture and art books, restoring the apartment to a state of blessed emptiness. It was a blank canvas, and for the first time I was excited to be the one to fill it. Now 6 months have passed. The late autumn sun streams into the big front window of what is no longer just the Daily Grind, but our shared space. The cafe is thriving, and right next door, in what used to be a vacant storefront, is the new official home of Mile High Restorations. We knocked down a wall, connecting the two spaces. Now the smell of fresh coffee mingles with the scent of polished steel, and customers can sip a latte while watching me work on my latest project through a large glass window. The business is better than I ever dreamed. I have a 3-month waiting list and even hired a part-time apprentice from the bike co-op. My old apartment is long gone. I moved into a smaller place with a much bigger garage, a space that Jenna and I have made our own. It's filled with comfortable furniture we picked out together, photos of our hiking trips, and yes, even a few bike parts on the coffee table. Our life is a happy, beautiful, organized chaos. With her, I've learned that a true partnership isn't about one person supporting the other's dream. It's about building a new dream together. Just yesterday, A crisp manila envelope arrived in the mail. It was from my lawyer. Inside were the final signed divorce papers. There was no big emotional reaction from me. I didn't feel sadness or anger. I simply felt closure. I placed the papers on my workbench next to the blueprints for my most ambitious project yet. A fully custom-built touring bike designed for a cross-country trip Jenna and I are planning for next summer. I looked from the legal document, the final relic of my old life, to the plans for my future. The pause Eva had initiated feels like a lifetime ago. She thought she was putting me on hold, but what she really did was set me free. She gave me the silence I needed to finally hear the person I was meant to be. And for that, in a strange way, I will always be grateful. My name is Liam Hayes, and this is how I learned that sometimes the end of one road is just the beginning of a much, much better ride.